All right, welcome everybody. I know we're just getting on here now, so I don't want to keep you waiting, and I definitely don't want to take up any more time from our outstanding speaker. So I am going to get us kicked off to this fantastic NAIFA Greater Washington YAT event. And I'm going to introduce Joey Davenport. He is the president of the Hoopus Performance Network in Chicago. He has over 25 years of experience in financial services as a top producer, manager, entrepreneur, and international speaker. Joey's organization is recognized by Inc. 5000 as one of the fastest growing privately held businesses in the US. And HPN's web-based training programs have received top recognition, including multiple Digital Media Innovators Awards and the ROI Institute's top 10 case studies of the year. Significant stuff. Joey is a co-author of the #1 best-selling book, The Power of Coaching, Engaging Excellence in Others. He is the executive producer of the HPN University and Trustworthy Selling. The university has over 50,000 members and is considered the #1 online content library in financial services. Trustworthy Selling was developed in collaboration with LIMRA International and has over 15,000 graduates. Joey is a past president of NAIFA Chicago, a graduate of NAIFA's Leadership and Life Institute, and he received the NAIFA Illinois Young Advisors Team Leader of the Year Award and the National Award for Association Excellence from NAIFA Federation. So he lives in Chicago with his wife of 19 years, Lindy, and their 12-year-old son, William, who was, I believe, just playing a little bit of basketball up until we got started. And he enjoys spending time with his family, traveling, and playing music in his rock band, Hot LZ, which is going to make a performance for us one of these days. No pressure, Joey. Take it away.
All right, Brian, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here with all of you. Anytime I can do something to support NAIFA, I'm more than happy to. As he shared with you guys, I'm a member of NAIFA Chicago, past president of NAIFA Chicago, and spent a lot of time in the NAIFA Federation over the years. And so kudos to you guys for being involved with NAIFA, and appreciate you guys at GWDC and the YAT group for hosting me today. I am going to share with you using behavioral economics to expedite decision making. And just to jump right in, two specific areas of focus today. First of all, I'm going to walk you through research from the $1 Million Roundtable, from LIMRA, which is a partner of mine, as Brian had mentioned, with Trustworthy Selling. I get to go into the LIMRA research coffers and identify a lot of content that I always use to add science behind the art of what I'm talking about. And so today I'm going to share with you insights on understanding today's consumer mindset. And again, that's from $1 Million Table research and LIMRA research around things like there's a trust gap between consumers and financial advisors. There's extensive procrastination and inertia, as you find with a lot of your prospects and clients. I'm going to get into the reasons why, what's creating that procrastination and inertia. Then I'm going to pivot to the tremendous market opportunity, in particular around life insurance and around retirement planning. And then what we'll do after we begin with kind of understanding the mindset, I'm going to share with you some behavioral economics techniques that have been proven to increase the likelihood of a prospect or a potential client moving forward by 29%. Behavioral economics has been around since the late 1970s, but had never been studied specifically in the insurance and financial services space. And so I'm going to share these behavioral economics techniques with you. Economics is very rational, but behavioral economics is very irrational, and your prospects and clients are very irrational human beings. And so to the extent that you can embrace some of these techniques to help them through the decision-making process, one, it's going to differentiate you as a financial professional, but also it's going to help you move them to take action by expediting the decision-making process. And before I jump in, I just want to get a shout out to my boy, Brock Jolly, who I know has done a ton of work there locally for you guys. He and I go way back. He's a faculty member of the university. And so I see Brock's on here and just thought I'd say what's up. Now, here's what's interesting. You can go to the $1 Million Roundtable meeting. For any of you in management, we could go to Gamma's LAMP conference or the new FinSecca conference. And the interesting thing about our business is you're going to have top producers, top managers up there sharing the secrets to their practice. It's not like anyone hoards any ideas, you know, in the business. They stand up there and go, here's what I'm doing. Here's why it works. Not many industries are like that. But the fact of the matter is less than 10% of participants in these conferences or on these Zoom calls or whatever it might be actually are going to go and do something with it. And typically I find it's your better producers. That's why your top producers are usually in an industry study group, and they go to these conferences and they take notes and they befriend people that are speaking on stage, and they actually go and execute. And so, you know, there's going to be a few of you today that are going to hear some of these things and go, oh yeah, I already knew that. Some of you are going to say, yeah, I used to do that. It worked so well. What? I stopped doing it. I hear that a lot in the industry, but my hope would be that you'd find 2 or 3 nuggets, language, techniques, whatever it might be, that you can go immediately apply to your practice. And so I kind of set the stage with the great philosopher Morpheus from the Matrix, who told Neo, sooner or later, you're going to realize, just like I did, there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. And so even if I share some basic things with you today that you already know or work so well you quit using it, the difference today is going to be those of you all that decide to go and do something with this knowledge, language, research, all the things that I'm going to share with you, because I do have a lot of practical things that I think you're going to find valuable. But it's up to you to implement and not only know the path, but walk the path. So let's jump into understanding today's consumer mindset. The $1 Million Roundtable did a study just a few years ago. And what they did is they asked consumers across all generations, has it become more difficult to trust an advisor today versus 5 years ago? And so this is from the silent generation to millennials. And as you can see on the screen, 85% of consumers said absolutely it's more difficult to trust a financial advisor today versus 5 years ago. Interestingly enough, Roundtable asked producers this same question, and only 59% of advisors thought this to be the case. So there's even this blind spot out there in the market amongst advisors of this perception of this trust gap that exists between the consumer and the advisor. And so anything that you can do to bridge the trust gap is going to differentiate you in the marketplace. It's going to help you to reduce relationship tension, increase trust, etc. The interesting thing about trust, you know, we did research, Limmer and HPN, to determine how soon does a prospect determine if they're going to trust you. And one thing we found is that 71% of prospects determine if they're going to trust an advisor at the end of the discovery process, or what most people refer to as fact finding. Just a quick side note, I always say fact finding is what you do to someone. Collaborative discovery is what you do with someone. It's a lot different than just fact finding. But the thing I find more interesting is in the left there in the darker blue, 29% of prospects say they determine if they're going to trust an advisor in the first 10 minutes of meeting an advisor. And so what you say and how you say it in your approach language right out of the gates is critically important to engendering trust. That's why for years we have talked to say, hey, first of all, I'd like to thank Brian Haney for introducing us. That's important because I work exclusively on a personal introduction basis. And then you go into your approach language. There's a number of benefits of starting the meeting off by referencing the person that introduced you to start with. I won't get into all that today, but that's just a good trust building technique out of the gates. And so if you're not doing that, I encourage you to do it. But the interesting thing is, if I was there face to face for this session and we whiteboarded and said, hey, what does trust mean to you all? 10 different people would come up with 10 different things that trust actually means. Some of them would be similar, but what we decided to do is we said, let's go to the consumer and let's ask the consumer what trust means to them. And it boils down to the 4 key facets of trust that's most important to consumers in the marketplace. First one is benevolence. And what benevolence means is the advisor putting his or her needs above my own needs, or are they putting my needs first? The second one is dependability. Are you doing what you say you're going to do? Are you delivering on your promises? The third one is integrity, sound moral, ethical principles, being honest and transparent, doing what's right, things like that. And lastly is competency. Do you have the knowledge, skills, and expertise? By the way, I just want to say this. because I'm talking to the YAT group and there's a number of newer advisors in the business. So often newer advisors get in the business and they're so caught up in wanting to know, well, if I know a little bit more of product knowledge and know a little bit more about this product and that product, you know, you're focused so much on competency. In the eyes of the consumer, competency was least important. They considered you competent until you prove otherwise. So even if you're a producer in this session today and you just got into the business in the last 6 months, if you have benevolence, dependability, and integrity, you've got 3/4 of what it takes to build trust. And then unless you just completely screw it up, they're going to assume you're competent until otherwise. And so anything you can say and do in your approach language, we call it the language of trust. And that's not the scope of my presentation today, but there is language that you can do to demonstrate benevolence, dependability, integrity, and competency in the sales process, but also in your approach language. And I have this Venn diagram because I think this is interesting. If you really peel back the layers on the 4 facets, integrity, benevolence, and dependability are all character-based. So most of us hopefully possess those things, whereas competency is skill-based. You learn that over time. And so the key is, as I mentioned, I think this lets a lot of you newer advisors off the hook because you've got hopefully have 3/4 of this that you bring to the table immediately, whether you're a career changer, whether you're right off the campus, whatever it might be. But the fact of the matter is there is a language of trust that we can convey to bridge this trust gap out in the marketplace, because there is a crisis of trust going on out in the marketplace between consumers and financial advisors. The other thing that's going on in the marketplace that reflects the consumer mindset is this. We know from research that 48 million households believe they need life insurance in a given year. 29 million households state that not only do they need life insurance, but they're going to go do something about it in the next 12 months. So this isn't a dormant need. This is a visible need where they're going, we need more life insurance. We're going to do something about it. But the fact of the matter is, based on the research, only 12% of US households pull the trigger and purchase life insurance in a given year. So you go, wow, even for people that are aware they need it, they're going to do something about it, they still don't do anything about it. So what is creating this inertia or this procrastination? And I could write a dissertation on that, which we don't have time today, but for today's purposes, what I'd like to share with you is that consumers are afraid and they are confused. For example, 43% of households report being afraid of making a mistake in their financial decision making. When people are afraid of making a mistake, what do they typically do? They do nothing. They just sort of wait it out. They hunker down and kind of see how things are going to go. This next one I find very interesting, and that is 5 out of 7 or 71% of consumers report being more confused after they meet with a financial advisor than before they met with the financial advisor, if you can imagine that. And so we show up with our fancy charts and our jargon, and we're completely confusing prospects and clients. And so anything that an advisor can do to reduce fear and reduce confusion in the marketplace, in the sales process, you're going to differentiate yourself and you are going to get people to move forward because you're reducing relationship tension, you're increasing trust. And as I get into a number of the behavioral economics principles that we're going to talk about today, I'll show you tactical ways to be able to do that. As I kind of set the backdrop and talk about understanding today's consumer mindset, I do think it's important to also talk about the tremendous market opportunity that exists. Again, because the number of you are yatters, if you will, and maybe newer to the business. A lot of times you come in, you go, oh, Uncle John's all set, Aunt Mary's all set, you know, people are already working with someone or whatever. And the fact of the matter is, people are grossly underinsured and people are not saving enough money. It's just the fact of the matter. And as I share this infographics with you, I would say, don't just think of this as research points. Think of this as language that you can use out in the marketplace, whether if it's for business development purposes or for building credibility in the discovery process, whatever it might take, to use this science to break down any preconceived notions out there that someone's neighbor or their friends are all set or they've already taken care of this or whatever it might be. And I'll just give you a few examples today. 30% of families with dependent children admit that they'll have immediate trouble meeting everyday living expenses if, God forbid, the breadwinner of the household, something were to happen to them. 30% of families with dependent children say they would have immediate trouble meeting everyday living expenses. And I don't, I do have this on here. I'll show you in a second how much income replacement most people have. By the way, you heard me say, God forbid. I learned from George McGuire, an old mentor of mine, who said, if you don't say God forbid 3 times a day, you're not in the life insurance business. And so I did thought that I would share that with you. If you're not saying God forbid 3 times a day, you're not in the life insurance business. 50% of households say they'd feel the loss of a primary wage earner within 6 months, and 7 out of 10 or 70% of households have life insurance, but it can only replace income for 3.5 years. That's why when we start talking about income replacement, most people are massively underinsured when it comes to that particular aspect. So these are real numbers. This is from the Life Insurance Barometer study from LIMRA and Life Happens last year. And so this is not just research, it's language that you can use out in the field as you're trying to break down these preconceived notions, whether it's to get introduced on a favorable basis to someone's aunt and uncle, whether it's to build credibility in the discovery process, however you see fit. If you just want to talk about retirement just for a second, 1 out of 6 retirees has a written retirement plan. Everybody thinks that everyone in retirement or approaching retirement's all set. 1 out of 6 has a written retirement plan. Think about that. 3 out of 10 consumers feel that they are well prepared for retirement. So if you ask that question, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your current retirement plan? People say it's a 7. What would it take to get it to a 10? Whatever they tell you is exactly what they're not getting from their current advisor or what they need an advisor for. This last one I'll share with you is one of my favorites. 66% of pre-retirees within 2 months of retirement have no clue what they're going to do with their 401k balance. And yet everyone thinks that Uncle John and Aunt Mary, who is approaching retirement or 6 months out from retirement, is all set and has all this stuff taken care of. The research is quite the contrary. 66% of pre-retirees within 2 months of retirement have no clue what they're going to do with their 401k balance. Why? Because they've been with the same company for 20, 30 years. Their money's tied up in the company's 401k sponsored plan, and many don't have a relationship with an advisor. So to the contrary, that window of time, about 6 months prior to retirement and 6 months afterwards, is prime time to be introduced to potential clients for you. And I've actually taught this language to 25-year-olds that have used it and now are getting referred up to people approaching retirement. Why? Because they're breaking down some of these preconceived notions that everybody thinks everyone's all set. The fact of the matter is 1 out of 6 retirees has a written retirement plan. We looked at the life insurance data. Use this as living, breathing data as you're out there in the marketplace. But I wanted to set the stage to share with you what's the mindset of the consumer. There's a trust gap. There is fear. There is confusion. That's what creates procrastination. But guess what? There is a tremendous market opportunity for advisors to have the courage to ask for favorable introductions, to push back in the discovery process and help align actions with intentions. Now, I wanted to make this a little bit interactive today. So we do have some polling questions, and I'm just going to do a pulse check here up front. And Liz, if you don't mind bringing up the poll question for our group, let's see how well you guys were listening. Which of the following represent the 4 facets of trust that we just talked about? A, benevolence, integrity, likability, competency. B, benevolence, integrity, dependability, competency. C, integrity, credibility, benevolence, or competency. Or D, knowledge, skill, connection, and likability. I'll give you about 5 seconds to pick your best answer there, and then we'll see what all of you all chose. So if you haven't answered yet, I'd ask you to do so now. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Liz, if you could share the results for us on that. Here we go. Okay, 14 of you said A, 71 B, 14 C. The answer is B, benevolence, integrity, dependability, and competency, the language of trust. Here's the second one we have up for you. Thanks for participating, you guys. And thanks for Liz for putting these together for us. What percentage of consumers state they're more confused after they met with an advisor than before? A, 42%, B, 57%, C, 71%, or D, 85%? Why don't you take 5 seconds and take your best guess there? What percentage of consumers state they're more confused after they met with an advisor than before they met with the financial advisor? And Liz, if we could go ahead and share our results there from the group. Okay, a couple of you guys said A, B. The correct answer is C, 71%. 83% of you said that are more confused after they meet with an advisor than before. Think about that. We show up the knight in shining armor with our fancy charts and graphs and our jargon, and they're more confused after they meet with us than before. That is a real issue, folks. And we're going to talk more about jargon and some misperceptions of words that we use in the business that are confusing. And let's go, Liz, for our last question. What percentage of families with dependent children admit they'll have immediate trouble meeting everyday living expenses if, God forbid, the primary breadwinner worked to make it home tonight? A, 15%, B, 30%, C, 45%, or D, 60%? We'll give you 5 seconds to answer, and I appreciate all of you participating. By the way, for those of you all that showed up today, you chose wisely, because I'm going to be dropping all kinds of nuggets. So those that didn't, tell them they missed out. And Liz, if we could see what our group said was the answers. All right. Some of you said 44% said B, 30%, 19% said 45%, and 38% said 60%. What percentage of families with dependent children admit they'll have immediate trouble meeting everyday living expenses? The answer is B, 30% admit they would have trouble meeting everyday living expenses if, God forbid, the primary wage earner didn't make it home tonight. So just a little knowledge check there. Thanks, Liz. I appreciate that. And again, we want to make this a little interactive so you guys aren't just sitting there listening to me regurgitate a bunch of content. So let's jump in to the meat of the presentation today, using behavioral economics to expedite decision making. Let's start off with, I'm not going to assume that everyone knows what behavioral economics is, so let's just do a quick level set. What is behavioral econ? It's the fusion of psychology and economics to explain human behavior as it relates to financial decision making. And if you think about this, economics is very rational. I remember when I was sitting in Econ 101 in college, and they have their different models and they work perfectly. And even then I'd scratch my head. I'm like, well, yeah, but what about when you infuse human behavior in that? Well, guess what? It junks everything up, because economics is rational, but behavioral economics is very irrational. As a matter of fact, behavioral economics, because people act irrationally, it's used around the world to, quote unquote, nudge consumers into socially desirable behaviors. Right here in my backyard at the University of Chicago, Dr. Richard Thaler, Dick Thaler, is considered the father of behavioral economics. He won a Nobel Prize just a few years ago in behavioral economics, and he wrote a book called Nudge. If you haven't checked that book out, it's really good. But what Nudge is all about is that around the world, what they've done is they've created mechanisms to nudge consumers into certain socially desirable decisions. So for example, in Europe, around pension plans, what they will do is by default, you automatically are defaulted into saving a certain percentage of income to go into this company-sponsored pension plan. You have to uncheck that default box to opt out of it. What typically happens around the world is you have to check to opt in. No, because it's good for you. You're going to be automatically opted in unless you opt out. That's a way to nudge people towards socially desirable behaviors. Another example is in some countries, they have food options where, let's say you go in to get a Happy Meal or whatever, it's defaulted to give you apples with the Happy Meal instead of fries. You have to ask for fries because by default, the healthy choice is what you would get, trying to nudge people into socially desirable behaviors that are best for them so they don't make irrational decisions. And the whole point here is there is ways by using behavioral economics to nudge your prospects and clients, if you will, in the decision-making process by the mere way that you present certain solutions. And I'll share with you these 7 behavioral economics techniques that I mentioned. Limerick HPN identified these. And what happened was when they were applied to the sales presentation, it increased the likelihood of a prospect moving forward by 29%. And what you're looking at here on the screen is we conducted focus groups throughout the United States, and we brought in 2 financial advisors. One used the traditional approach to the sales presentation, and the other financial advisor infused these behavioral economics techniques in their presentation. And consumers observed these two different presentations, and you guys are outside of DC, so you've probably seen the political shows. If you like what you hear, you dial up. If you don't like what you hear, you dial it down. And so what you're seeing on the screen is a visual representation of consumers' thoughts and feelings towards observing these presentations. And the light blue line is the advisor that used the traditional approach to the sales presentation. And the dark blue line is the advisor that incorporated the 7 behavioral economics techniques. So what you say and how you say it in the sales process makes a huge difference in moving people to action or not. It's been scientifically proven. And really kind of the premise of the research findings was this: behavioral economics invokes more feelings and leaves a better impression with prospects and clients. The immediate context of decision-making makes a big difference in whether people move forward or not. And we can improve people's decision-making by controlling certain features that influence those decisions. Now, not manipulation. I'm not talking about being manipulative, but as I share language with you and certain techniques in a moment, these are ways that we can control how these features are presented on things to influence those decisions. And basically, in a nuance of it, simple differences in how decisions are presented can influence the choices that people make. And so here's ones that I'm going to focus on today just because of our time together. I don't have a chance to go into all of the research and techniques from this, but using personal experiences to overcome optimism, providing an easy way for people to decide and make decisions, demonstrating fairness. People want to be treated fairly in the sales process. If I feel like you as the financial advisor is not treating me fairly, I will make decisions counter to my best interest just to spite you, if you can imagine that. And so we want to create an environment and give the optics that we're treating prospects and clients fairly. And lastly, you have to make mental room for the expense. People have mental accounting for their different pockets of money, my boat money, my Saturday night money, my retirement, my kids' education. To the extent what you're recommending checks off multiple buckets, I'm more likely to justify spending that dollar. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. So let's start with using personal experiences to overcome natural optimism. So this behavioral economics technique is based on 2 concepts: herding principle, which means other people are likely to do what people similar to them and in similar circumstances are also doing around their financial security. And it's also based around optimism bias, which means that people are naturally optimistic that things are not going to happen to them. I'll give you a couple examples. If you look at the studies around what percentage of people opt in for car insurance on a rental car, it's about 13%. Why? Because a lot of people think they're naturally good drivers. They're not going to have an accident. They're in the rental car, that sort of a thing. If we went to a couple a week before they got married and you said, hey, what are the odds you think this is going to work out? You think they're going to go 50-50. No, till death do us part, man. That happens to other people. That doesn't happen to me. But we know, like with divorce rates around the country are much higher than that, but people don't think that that's necessarily going to happen to them. And so if you look at other products that are in other verticals and other industries out there, people can go to peer review sites like Amazon and Yelp to see what other people are saying about buying this car or buying this stove or vacation to this place or whatever it might be. But the fact of the matter is, consumers have no idea what their friends and family and neighbors are doing regarding their finances. I always found it interesting, when you're growing up, your parents tell you 2 things: don't talk to strangers and don't talk to people about their finances. And yet we recruit people in the business, and the first thing we tell them to do is go talk to complete strangers about their finances. And we wonder why some people short circuit in the business. But the fact of the matter is, it's a taboo topic. So very rarely am I going to say, hey, what are you doing around life insurance? Or where's your 401k? Some people might, but for the most part, they don't. And so in other words, people are naturally optimistic. And the only way to overcome this natural optimism is through story selling and sharing personal experiences of people like them, either positive or how they were able to overcome, some negative thing that might have happened to them had they not met you or implemented financial security. And so we talk about story selling. Joe Jordan, you guys have probably heard him speak around the industry. He's always talking about don't speak to people as far as the left brain analytical, talk to people as far as the right brain, conceptual side and story selling. And I'll give you a quick example. So I have a good friend of mine, a fraternity brother, who had bought $1 million of term insurance from me with waiver premium. And he goes out to his mailbox at age 30, walks over the hill, and going out to check the mailbox, a car veers over the hill, veers off the road, hits him, knocks him 40 feet into a fence. They life flight him to Vanderbilt Hospital. He has a number of issues over a few months. He would like black out for actually over a couple of years. He would like black out for like 6 hours at a time. They couldn't really figure out what was going on. Eventually they found that he damaged his pituitary gland, which creates a lot of issues. So on this term insurance, there was a waiver of premium in the event that he were to become disabled. And so with that, the company at the time, once he was fully disabled, they converted the $1 million of term because of the waiver premium to $1 million of whole life. The company pays that premium every single month. It's like $2,100 a month. At 65, he's going to have $2.4 million of cash value that he's going to be able to tap into. Now, if I take 1 minute and share that story with you about waiver premium on a term policy, do you ever think I'm never not selling waiver premium on a term policy? You betcha. But what most of us do out there is we go, with this term policy, there's a waiver of premium. If you get disabled for a period of time, the company is obligated to, and people go, nah, I'm good. And you go, okie dokie, and you're off to the next one. Any of you all that have ever dealt with waiver of premium in real life knows that you would never sell a policy without it because you've experienced the massive magic of like a waiver of premium. But the fact of the matter is, I need to tell that story to tug on the heartstrings so they remember it and it weighs the importance of it. And the fact of the matter is, we need stories for term policies, kitty policies, IRA rollovers, 529 plan, all of these different things. We need stories or to borrow stories because it helps to overcome this natural optimism that people have that it ain't going to happen to me. Again, it taps into the herding mentality that I'm willing to do what other people like me are willing to do. And again, we've got to share with people what the reality of the situation is to help them avoid this optimism that everyone has. Second concept I want to talk about is providing an easy way to decide. 3 things around this. First of all, avoid ambiguity. I already shared with you that 71% of consumers are more confused after they meet with an advisor than before. So consumers are very confused by financial terms, and we get in our own way by using jargon. If we were face-to-face at this YAT meeting, we'd all be talking about the business, and we got our 3-letter acronyms, and every company has their own, and it gets even more convoluted. And so we want to reduce ambiguity, and I'll talk more about that in a second. We want to use visualization. We're dealing with an intangible, right? And so because we're dealing with an intangible and people are making a bet on us or trusting in us for things that might come to fruition, whether it's life insurance or retirement planning, let's say 15, 20 years down the road, we have to get them to test drive the feelings they're going to get as a result of buying this intangible product or service. When you go to buy a car, what is the first thing the car salesman wants you to do? They want you to test drive it. Why? So you can experience it. You can smell the leather. You can roll the window down. Your hair's blowing in the wind. You can push the accelerator. And because we're dealing with an intangible product, we want to be able to get them to visualize the benefits that they're going to reap by implementing or executing this delayed gratification product. So, I mentioned Brock earlier. He's the master of 529 planning. So when we're talking about those things, we want to talk about, hey, so when little Johnny's walking across the stage at Notre Dame as a legacy, think about how that's going to make you feel, where you went to college and now he is. When we were fly fishing with the grandkids up at the lake house, once you get retirement, think about because of the work that we're doing today and the fact that you're sacrificing today, it's going to make that possible in the future. Lou Casera, any of you guys that know Lou Casera, is a master at visualization and getting people to try on the feelings and emotion they're going to feel by implementing an intangible solution. And then lastly, on providing an easy way to decide is heuristics. Heuristics is a fancy word for rules of thumb. And rules of thumb are very powerful, and prospects and clients love them because it gives them a frame of reference of what other people in their similar situation have done. Two things in particular I want to unpack a bit from this. I've said enough about visualization, but I want to talk about avoiding ambiguity and confusion and heuristics. So let's go out to avoiding ambiguity. It's interesting, when we were growing up, many people were taught that the best way to impress other people is to use complex words and talk over their head. And so we bring some of that baggage with us into the business. And some people mistake abstraction with intelligence and vagueness with profoundness. And I know newer advisors, and those of you adders in here, when you get in the business, you don't know what you don't know. So you want to use fancy words or talk over people's heads. And it couldn't be, it's the worst thing you could be doing, right? You just want to be transparent about being new. You know, sophistication does not mean complicated. Even if you go into advanced markets, any veterans that might be on here, they still want things simple in the affluent market, right? Sophisticated doesn't mean complicated. And so to the extent that we can keep things simple, but the problem is, in an attempt to appear more intelligent, sometimes we use product jargon, or we just kind of get caught in our own way and don't realize that people don't understand what the heck we're talking about because we're saying these things all the time. And I'll give you a couple of quick examples. And these are like recent examples that I found in the last year. A lot of us use the word protection. And if we followed a number of you around, you're going to talk about protection products, right? Protection products. Well, man, when they poll and ask consumers what protection means to them, they associate the word protection with birth control. They do not associate it with risk management products or financial security. And yet a number of advisors are out there using the word protection products, and it's confusing people in the marketplace. Another word that we tend to use a lot is premium. We're saying, oh, this premium, it's going to cost you this monthly premium. What does premium mean in every other industry out there when people use the word premium? It means expensive. And so there's no wonder that the average millennial thinks that term insurance costs 10 times more than it actually does. So again, we have to be very aware of the ambiguity we're creating through the jargon and the acronyms and things that we think people understand, but they don't. And so I want you to be aware of it as you're out there and you're presenting solutions. And I'll show you ways to check in with people to make sure that you're not confusing them. Heuristics, I mentioned, are rules of thumb. When you can't evaluate your purchase after the fact, meaning that it might not play out till 10, 15, 20 years down the road, you're forced into an evaluation of the decision before the fact based on rules of thumb or what other people have done. That's why rules of thumb have been very popular over the years. And just to give you some very common ones, and by the way, check with your compliance departments to make sure that you're able to use these, but you know, how much should be allocated to your emergency fund? For years, we've talked about 3 to 6 months of expenses should be allocated to your emergency fund. By the way, on a side note, where does that come from? It comes from the 90-day elimination period. Very typical 90 to 180-day elimination period on a disability policy. So you have a buffer there, but people tend to understand in the market, you need about 3 to 6 months of funds allocated to your emergency fund. And that's a good rule of thumb heuristic. For years, we've talked about 8 to 10 times your income in life insurance. That's a great frame of reference for people because they can see, hey, most people in your situation own about 8 to 10 times their income in life insurance. Now we can do an analysis and get specific based on what you want to have happen of what that number should be specifically, but just to kind of give you a frame of reference there. How much money will you need in retirement? Experts say about 75 to 80% of your pre-retirement income. So again, these are things, whether it's in the discovery process, whether it's when I'm making my presentations, don't shun away from heuristics or rules of thumb. People embrace them and they love them because it gives them a frame of reference and it helps them to make decisions better. The third concept I want to dig down and unpack a little bit, and I mentioned up front, is demonstrating fairness. People want to be treated fairly in the sales process. People will make decisions not optimally beneficial to them if they perceive they're not being treated fairly. So if I think the financial advisor is not treating me fairly, I will make decisions counter to my best interest to spite the advisor, if you can imagine that. And so there's things we can do in the sales process that creates the optics or an environment of fairness that reduces relationship tension, that increases trust. And I'll give you a couple of examples today of some language that you can do. It's very simple, but you can start using this, heck, starting tomorrow. So first of all, we already know that the majority of people are more confused after they meet with advisors before. Let's take a ledger presentation as an example. Many of you didn't understand a ledger presentation fully till you're about a year in the business. And so I don't know why we think we can walk someone through a ledger presentation and think that they're going to get it completely the first time you've shown it to them. So we know that's confusing. And so as I'm going through my analysis or a ledger presentation or whatever it might be, I might pause and say, hey, I know this stuff can be confusing to people. I just want to check in with you for a moment and ask, what questions do you have up to this point? Versus most financial advisors say, do you have any questions? Think about it. It's a big difference in how I ask that. What questions do you have? Versus, do you have any questions? By saying what questions do you have, it's a little tweak on that, but I'm assuming you have questions. I know this could be confusing. I'm assuming you have questions. I'm creating a fair environment for you to ask questions. Whereas if I say, do you have any questions? Many times people will go, and they're like a deer in headlights and you lost them back at hello. And by saying this, you just say, hey, what questions do you have up to this point? I'm assuming there probably are some questions. Another way you could tweak this is say, hey, let me just check in with you and ask, am I explaining all this clearly up to this point? Versus most advisors say, what? Does this make sense to you? That is a huge difference in the way that you say that. Because if I say, am I explaining this clearly? Who am I putting the responsibility and onus on to have to explain this clearly? Me, as the advisor. It's my role to explain it clearly. Am I explaining this clearly? Not, does this make sense to you? That's putting it on you. So what I'm doing is optically is creating a safe, a fair environment to say, hey, what questions do you have? Am I explaining this clearly? It reduces relationship tension. They think you're treating fairly, and it builds and engenders trust and helps people to ask questions, which helps you to get where you need to go quicker versus assuming there's no questions or just them being scared to ask questions. And then at the end saying, I want to think about it. And the other thing I just want to tell you about demonstrating fairness, and this is from some MDRT studies and work that I've done with some top producers. Prospects want you to provide 3 options, but they want the advisor to make a specific recommendation and tell them why you're making that specific recommendation. So for example, you say, here it is all term insurance, here it is all permanent insurance, here it is a combination of the two. I recommend we do a combination of the two based on cash flow availability. Fair enough? And so again, I'm going, here it is all term, here it is all permanent, here it is a combination of the two. That's what I recommend to do. Here's why I recommend that. People feel like you're treating them fairly, you're giving them options, but you're making a specific recommendation and explaining why. My last concept I want to share with you is making mental room for the expense. And what this is, it helps to overcome loss aversion. People are very adverse to feeling like they're going to lose out on money or lose out on something. And it really taps into also what I mentioned, which is mental accounting. And so they're able to classify the expense. And I also want to talk about demonstrating present value. This one's a little complicated, but the first one's not as complicated. Here's what mental accounting is. When an expense can be classified as meeting more than one need, it can be assigned to the account to justify its occurrence. Think about this. What is our biggest competition? Our biggest competition is where are they going to spend the dollar we're asking for? Are they going to just spend it on financial security, which is delayed gratification, or are they going to spend it on immediate gratification needs, right, that are not focused on financial security? So we're competing with a dollar and where they're going to spend it. People have mental accounts for their money. As I mentioned earlier, I've got mental accounts for my boat money, my Saturday night money, my kids' education, my retirement planning. To the extent what you're recommending taps into multiple buckets, I'm more likely to justify spending that dollar. This is why combo products have become so popular amongst baby boomers. So, you've got the annuity that can be leveraged for long-term care purposes. Just different combo products out there. That's why that's become very popular. The other thing is, in the old days, in the 70s, a great life insurance sales concept was live, die, quit, become disabled. And tons of veterans sold tons of permanent life insurance with that concept. And what it is look, if you die too soon, your family's covered. If you live too long, we can annuitize it and put a stream of income on the back end, you're covered. If you get sick or hurt along the way with waiver of premium, it self-completes itself. And finally, by about the year, depending on, the company and policy, you've got enough cash value in that you've got the flexibility to stop paying on it. So that's called live, die, quit, become disabled. That sold a ton of life insurance over the years. But guess what? Behavioral economics wasn't around necessarily in the 70s. And old schoolers didn't use that because they're tapping into behavioral economics, but that worked really well. Why? Because even in the 70s, people had mental accounts for their money, even though we didn't call this behavioral economics. And so to the extent that what you're recommending can kill several birds with one stone, whether that's a combo product, whether you're talking about the living benefits of whole life and things like that, you're going to be more likely to justify spending that dollar with you because, again, they find it as efficient. And then the last thing I want to share with you just quickly in the same concept is called present value. So what we found in the behavioral economics research is that current income flow is more important in budgeting decisions than present value of lifetime wealth. So that's a mouthful to say this. People aren't interested in the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, whether you're talking about an annuity and you're going to have $1.8 million at the end of the line, whether you're talking about a death benefit, you're going to have $870,000 of death benefit. People want to hear about it in the terms of monthly income. So this annuity is going to, generate, $8,000 of monthly income for the remainder of your life. That's how people think about it, not the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. My buddy Joe Jordan gets really upset with annuity companies because their marketing has really gotten this wrong and missed the mark. And so again, you want to talk to people in terms of monthly income around those things. And the other thing is people tend to strongly resist spending money that's not designated for a given use. And the quick example of that is anytime you're going in and making recommendations, they did not know you probably 90 days before meeting you. So whether they say it or not, in their mind, they're thinking, I have not budgeted for this. And so a lot of you get the old, I'm going to think about it or whatever. What we found in the work we do with top advisors, if you simply acknowledge this and say, look, I know you haven't budgeted for this, but if we can find the money this year, we can be sure to budget for it next year. Fair enough? And just by acknowledging that, the prospect was more likely to move forward with it. And so it's just a small technique to say that because, again, they're thinking about the fact that they are having to spend money that wasn't really designated before for anything. So just quickly, we'll do a knowledge check as we wrap up, just to make sure you grasp some of these concepts. Thanks, Liz. What were the behavioral economics principles we reviewed today? Using personal experience to overcome optimism, providing an easy way to decide, C, demonstrating fairness, D, making mental room for the expense, or E, all of the above. And I'll give you 5 seconds to, what were the behavioral econ principles that we reviewed today? See if you guys can remember them. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Liz, let's go ahead and bring up answers to that. Correct, all the above. I gave you guys an easy one, but I did want you to remember the personal experiences, overcome optimism, provide an easy way to decide, and all the others. The next one, Liz, if we could. What were the techniques recommended to provide an easy way to decide? Avoid ambiguity, mental awareness heuristics, avoid ambiguity, visualization heuristics, visualization, ambiguity, rules of thumb, or simplify hinting and just decide for them. What were the 3 techniques we recommended to provide an easy way to decide? I'll give you 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1 on your answers on that. See if you guys got the right answer here. Okay, a little bit of a mixture. 29% of you said A, 59% said B, and 12% said C. It is B. You want to avoid ambiguity. You want them to visualize these intangible products and solutions you're recommending, and heuristics, which is another word for rules of thumb. That might have been what some of you guys did see. Thanks, Liz, and we'll do our last one here. One of the ways to determine fairness is by saying the following. Does this make sense to you? Are you tracking with me? Am I explaining this clearly, or do you have any questions? One of the ways to demonstrate fairness is by saying the following. Which of those is a line that I provided with you all? 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Sorry, we're going a little faster here. Am I explaining this clearly? 83% of you said that. Absolutely. Why? I'm putting the onus on me. It's my responsibility to explain this clearly. Thanks for participating, you guys. I appreciate it. Liz, thanks for getting those prepped for us. So just in summary, we wanted to talk about understanding today's consumer mindset. There is a trust gap in the marketplace. If you remember, the MDRT study found that 85% of consumers across all generations said it's more difficult to trust an advisor today versus 5 years ago. And advisors even thought that their perception of that is much less than consumers, but it is an issue. We talked about the 4 facets of trust that were most important to consumers is benevolence, integrity, dependability, and competency. You can use language right in your approach language to demonstrate that. It makes a big difference. Remember, there's fear and confusion in the marketplace. Anything that you can do to reduce fear and confusion is going to differentiate yourself and help you to stand out. We talked about using behavioral economics to expedite decision-making. Economics is very rational. Behavioral economics is very irrational. And so if you can incorporate some of these behavioral economics techniques that I shared with you today, it's going to help you help people through the decision-making process around financial security products. And many times people make irrational decisions around that. And so we can nudge or frame those decisions by using some of this language we talked about today. And just the last couple of points I want to make is this. Up front, when I showed you the 29 million households that stated they're likely to buy in the next 12 months, if they actually did buy, total coverage would increase by $4.8 trillion and increase industry revenues by $9 billion. I talked about the 48 million households who say they need more life insurance. If the 48 million who needed more life insurance actually bought, it would increase coverage by 9.5 trillion and add 17 billion of premium to the industry. What you do is provide a financial security safety net out there in the marketplace. The work that you do is noble. For those of you all that are involved with NAIFA, you probably know this. Social Security pays out $1.9 billion per day. The life insurance industry pays out $1.6 billion per day. And I'm telling you, people are grossly underinsured. They're not saving enough money. We looked at some of the LIMRA infographics around that. There is a tremendous market opportunity for each and every one of you. You've chosen a noble profession, but you have to connect with your power of purpose. And Nietzsche said, he or she who has a why can endure anyhow. If you connect with your power of purpose, you have courageous conversations, you proactively get favorable introductions to other people, you are going to make a difference. But easy jobs don't pay well. You have to have the courage to do that. Hopefully I've empowered you with some of the science today and some of the art to help you to go out and do that more effectively. It's my honor. I'd like to thank NAIFA-GWDC and the YAC group and committee for having me on here today. And sorry, I'm about 5 minutes over from what we anticipated, but hope you enjoyed it. And I guess I'll turn it back over. Maybe Brian, I think to you. Thanks everyone. And good luck to each and every one of you.